Your ancestors worked 15 hours a week, not 15 hours a day. A week, and the person who brought home the most food got mocked for it. This wasn't poverty. This wasn't struggle. This was the design. 300,000 years of it, running so smoothly that most people never had to think about time at all. Then something changed, and now you're watching this video instead of sitting around a fire. It's December 1969. Anthropologist Richard Lee brings a fat ox into a Kumsan camp in the Kalahari as a gift, the biggest animal he could find. The camp mocks it for weeks, calling it scrawny, useless, a joke. He finally asks why. An elder named Tomaso explains, when a hunter kills much meat, he starts to think of himself as a chief, so we always speak of his meat as worthless. This way we call his heart. Then a pause. We have been doing the same to you. The ox fed 30 people for days. That story contains almost everything you need to understand about how your ancestors actually lived. Let's walk through a day. Before we get to the day, we need to start with the night before, because they didn't sleep the way you do. There was no single 8-hour block. Sleep researcher Jerome Siegel studied the Hadza in Tanzania and the San in Namibia, and found the same pattern everywhere: a first sleep of 3 to 4 hours, then a natural waking in the middle of the night, quiet conversation, tending the fire, sometimes sex, shawls, then a second sleep until dawn, that restless window you hit at 2 a.m, the one where your mind won't stop. That might not be insomnia, that might just be the ancient program still running. By the time the sun came up, the camp was already stirring, not with alarms, not with anxiety. The fire was low. Children were already moving. Someone was eating leftover food from the night before, cold, coffles, straight from the ground. No coffee, no agenda, no notifications, just the day, beginning the only way it knew how. By mid-morning, the work had begun, and it was already almost over. Marshall Salin spent years synthesizing fieldwork from hunter-gatherer groups across 4 continents. His conclusion stopped anthropologists cold. Foragers averaged 3 to 5 hours of subsistence work per day. Everything, food, water, shelter, tools, covered in the time it takes to watch 2 episodes of a TV show, roughly 15 hours a week. The average American logs 47. Among the Hadza, women left camp in small groups, digging tubers with wooden sticks, collecting berries, reading the landscape the way you read a familiar street. A good morning's work filled a bark container and fed a family. A Hadza woman might carry 25 pounds of food and water on her back, in heat above 95 degrees, over miles of uneven ground. Then she came home, and the serious demands of the day, by almost any standard we'd recognize, were done. What happened next is the part nobody talks about. The hunters left early. Most of them came back with nothing. Frank Marlowe spent years tracking Hadza hunters in Tanzania. On any given day, a hunter's chance of making a large kill, a zebra, a giraffe, a wildebeest, was roughly 3 to 4%. Most days ended with empty hands and tired legs, and when a hunter walked back into camp without meat, nobody looked up. No disappointment, no explanation demanded. He sat down at the edge of camp, quietly, ate whatever was available, rested. The day continued exactly as it would have anyway. Failure wasn't a crisis. It was Tuesday. We tend to picture the ancestral hunter as a triumphant figure, spear raised, kill secured. But the honest image is quieter. A man sitting in the dirt, slightly tired, watching children play, waiting for tomorrow's attempt. What's surprising isn't that they failed so often. It's that nobody seemed to mind. But on the days they did connect, the rules of what happened next were stranger still. A Hadza hunter takes down a giraffe. It's a significant kill. Enough meat to feed the entire camp for days. He hauls it back, and the distribution begins immediately, not by him, but by the group. Elders first, children next. Everyone receives a portion. The hunter gets the same share as everyone else, sometimes less. No trophy, no ceremony, no preferential cut, and if he makes the mistake of seeming proud about it, the mockery begins. Just like Richard Lee's ox. The bigger the kill, the harder they push back, not out of cruelty, out of precision. A hunter who feels superior stops being useful to the group. The system had been quietly solving for ego for thousands of years. Status in this world wasn't built by accumulating. It was built by giving, and then acting like it was nothing. We still admire that quality in people, We just forgot to build a world that rewards it. While the hunters were out failing quietly, someone else was doing the most reliable work in camp. Grandmothers. Anthropologist Kristen Hawkes noticed something strange during her fieldwork with the Hadza. The most productive foragers in camp weren't young men flush with strength. They were older women in their 60s and 70s, walking 8 to 12 miles in a single day, digging tubers with wooden sticks, carrying 15 to 20 pounds back on their backs, outworking women half their age. Consistently, Hawkes eventually built an entire theory around it, the grandmother hypothesis, the idea that human longevity itself may have been shaped by the survival value of grandmothers, that we live as long as we do, in part, because older women kept showing up. There's something in that worth sitting with. The most invisible members of the group were quietly holding everything together. The camp didn't just tolerate them, it was built around them. By early afternoon, the serious work of the day was done, and then nothing. Not restless, nothing. Not guilty, nothing. Just people sitting in the shade, talking, picking lice from each other's hair, watching children play. Anthropologist James Sussman observed that among the Duak Cholonsi, an idle afternoon camp wasn't a sign of laziness, it was a sign of success. The children weren't in school, they weren't being taught. Peter Gray's research on hunter-gatherer childhood found that skills, fire-making, tracking, plant identification, were transmitted almost entirely through mixed-age playgroups. A 6-year-old learned by following a 12-year-old. The 12-year-old learned by following a 17-year-old. Adults demonstrated, nobody instructed. The afternoon just happened, unhurried, unscheduled. No one was optimizing it. We have a word for what they were doing. We call it wasting time. They didn't have that word. They didn't have that concept. They just had the afternoon. Then the sun went down, and this is where it gets beautiful. Anthropologist Polly Weissner spent decades recording conversations among the Jolhawaonsi, Kung, during the day. About a third of talk was practical. Food, tools, small disputes, useful. Force, functional, forgettable. But at night, around the fire, everything shifted. 81% of nighttime conversation was story, legends of ancestors, jokes that had been told 100 times and still landed. News of relatives in camps 2 days walk away, accounts of hunts that happened years ago, retold until they became mythology. The fire did something to people. It loosened them, extended the day past darkness in a way no other species had managed, and in that extended warmth, something that looked a lot like culture was being quietly built and passed forward. No screens, no headphones, just 30 people, and a fire, and the specific pleasure of being known by the people around you. That fire burned for 300,000 years. We traded it for something. The question is whether we know what. Here's the honest accounting. We live longer now. Infant mortality collapsed. Famine became rare. A toothache no longer kills you. These are not small things. These are enormous things. The trade was real, and it was worth making, but it was still a trade. The average American works 1,800 hours a year. The Hadza work roughly 800. That gap, 1,000 hours, is time that used to belong to sitting in the shade, watching children learn by playing, telling stories that mattered to people who knew your name. We didn't just get busier. We built an entire civilization on the assumption that busyness is virtue, that rest is something you earn, that the person who never stops is the person worth admiring. But you are running that belief on a body that was never designed for it, a hunter-gatherer body, in a world of deadlines, and rent, and notifications that arrive at 2 a.m, right in the middle of your second sleep. The mismatch isn't in your head, it's in your bones. Think about what your ancestors considered a good day. Enough food, a few hours of effort, children playing nearby, a fire at night, and people around it who knew every story you'd ever told and wanted to hear them again anyway. That was wealth, not gold, not square footage, not a title, time, and the people to spend it with. We have more things now than any human in history, more comfort, more safety, more years on the clock. And somehow the one thing our ancestors had in abundance, unhurried time with the people they loved, is the thing most of us are quietly starving for. Nobody is going back to the Kalahari, but it's worth knowing what you left there.